Good morning from Windsor, where the funeral of Prince Philip is taking place later today. An unwavering loyalty to the Queen, country and Commonwealth is how the Duke of Edinburgh will be remembered at the service. Soldiers will line the route to St George's Chapel, where a group of 30, led by the Queen, will pay their last respects. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
Relaxed and at ease, this is how the Queen will remember her dedicated consort, releasing one of her favourite photographs of Prince Philip as she prepares to say goodbye. It will be in the ornate setting of St George's Chapel that Her Majesty will sit alone amongst reminders of the Duke, one of only 30 in the congregation due to COVID, making it an intimate family service. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who's involved in the ceremony, says the Duke was determined to make his mark on this final farewell.
He was involved in every detail of it. It is meticulously planned for over a quarter of a century, and when the order of service is seen, his imprint will be all over it. And he didn't want to fuss, and he knew exactly what he wanted, and it was thoughtful. And I think that people listening to this service, watching it on the TV, will find it speaks very deeply to their own hearts.
His influence couldn't be clearer in the order of service. Among the music chosen, the Jubilate written for St George's Chapel at Prince Philip's request. He also asked for Psalm 104 to be set to music. At the end of the service, the buglers of the Royal Marines will not only sound the last post, but also action stations, a call to action in the Royal Navy. There will be no eulogy or readings from the family, but they're not usually a feature of royal funerals. The unique touches will be visible from the start of the procession, from the Land Rover he helped to design, to his ponies and carriage on display as his coffin is driven away. A truly unforgettable character that his children have so fondly remembered this week. Princess Anne's former private secretary says his influence as a father was clear.
They certainly shared, I think, many of the same characteristics. I mean, a real sense of duty, and just get on with the job in hand. You know, work hard, don't expect too many thanks, and just do the job to the best of your ability.
Inside the grounds, Prince Edward, the Counts of Wessex and their daughter Lady Louise had come to see the flowers left outside of the castle, moved during the week and placed next to St George's Chapel. COVID has meant that the royal family haven't been able to come out and thank people in the ways that they would have wanted. But the fact that they are still allowing cameras in for this very close family funeral shows a genuine desire to allow others to share in this moment of mourning for a dedicated consort and a man that they loved very much. They're asking people not to come to Windsor and instead join them in a minute's silence from their own homes.
We live quite local here, so we come quite often, and it's really, the mood is different.
He's done a lot for our country, which actually I've only realised in the last week.
Ahead of the funeral, these were the images the family wanted to share. Prince Philip, the father and grandfather, faithful supporter of his wife and Queen, always looking down on her as they prepare to remember him.
Well, Rhiannon joins me now here at Windsor Castle. Rhiannon, the thing that I think is the loveliest thing so far today is the picture that they've released of the Queen and Prince Philip up at Balmoral.
We've seen so many photographs, haven't we, this week, of Prince Philip in maybe his military regalia or carrying out those official duties with the Queen. And yet, when it came to that moment that Her Majesty, we haven't heard from her this week, but she obviously wanted to share something with us. And we got that rather informal photograph of them on holiday in Scotland. Prince Philip relaxing back, the Queen smiling. And I think it gives that sense of the man that she will be remembering today, the man behind the scenes that maybe we didn't get to see all that often. Yes, we got to see his cheeky side, but we didn't necessarily get to see those intimate family moments. And that's something that has really come across this week, is with all the family tributes, they have been so warm and so affectionate in a way that I probably didn't anticipate. And it's sort of been said to me...
We've seen a lot more of the royal family this week than I would have ever expected.
I think it was important for them to come out and pay their tributes, especially at a time when they can't come out and thank members of the public for leaving flowers. So I think, in a way, they have wanted to put those messages out there. For example, the Prince of Wales last weekend giving a message on the doorstep at Highgrove, messages from the family. And in a sense, they have, I think, lifted the veil a bit on relationships between the family. They really are showing that today will be about, yes, celebrating his amazing achievements, but also marking the man and not the post. And while we will talk about his dedicated service and duty, this was ultimately a father, a grandfather and a husband.
Having said that, Rhiannon, when we look at the service, there won't be family members standing up and speaking.
And I think some people will be surprised by that. For the palace, it was important to share the order of service because ultimately they're asking people not to come here to Windsor. So they're hoping people at home can read along in a way with the order of service. But yeah, there is no eulogy, there are no family readings. We're told that that is fairly traditional for royal funerals, but we know that Prince Philip has tried to shake things up a little bit when it comes to his own farewell. And in some ways they could have included family readings, but in a way, maybe is he protecting them from further spotlight? We know that the cameras are inside the chapel today. It's going to be a very poignant moment when we see Her Majesty the Queen. And maybe it was decided that actually this is not necessarily a moment that the family need to stand up and publicly speak. Instead, I think the service, the way it's been put together, will speak volumes.
Rhiannon will be talking to you lots more throughout the morning, I'm sure. Thanks very much for now. Well, while the funeral service will take place at 3 o'clock, a procession will begin before that. This is how events will unfold. At just after 20 to 3, the Duke of Edinburgh's coffin will be carried from the state entrance of Windsor Castle. The Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, will place the coffin on a specially modified Land Rover, which Prince Philip helped design. At 2:45, the procession will set off, led by the chiefs of the armed forces and other senior military figures. It will pass to the north side of the Round Tower, followed on foot by the Prince of Wales and other members of the royal family. The Queen will be driven in the state Bentley. The route will be lined with representatives drawn from the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, the Highlanders 4th Battalion Royal Regiment and the Royal Air Force. Minute guns will be fired from the east lawn of the castle by the King's Royal Horse Artillery, and the bells of the curfew tower will toll. The Rifles Regiment will provide a guard of honour and band to play the national anthem as the coffin enters Horseshoe Cloister, before coming to a stop at the foot of the chapel's west steps at 2:53. The Royal Marines bearer party will carry the coffin to the chapel porch, where it will pause at 3 p.m, when a national minute's silence will be held. The Dean of Windsor and the Archbishop of Canterbury will then receive Prince Philip's coffin in the chapel and the service will begin. The congregation in St George's Chapel will be made up of 30 people, with the Queen likely to be sitting alone to meet social distancing rules. A small choir of 4 people will sing pieces of music chosen by the Duke of Edinburgh. There will be no congregational singing. At the end of the service, Prince Philip's coffin will be lowered into the royal vault beneath the chapel choir. Well, although today's royal funeral has been scaled back because of coronavirus restrictions, we will still see a formal military send-off for the Duke of Edinburgh. Let's talk now to the Lieutenant General David Leakey, who organised many state occasions when he served as Black Rod at the Palace of Westminster. Good to talk to you this morning. These kind of events, they are long in the planning, aren't they? What will be going on, do you think, this morning?
You're right, they are long in the planning, and the plan which the Duke of Edinburgh himself drew up for his own funeral has, of course, been significantly adapted because of the coronavirus and the restrictions and measures around it. And so the plan that we're seeing today is in many ways very, very different to the one that's been on the books and has been tweaked and modified by both staff, by the military, the police, the security, to the one that we see today. But the plan will have been very, very carefully thought through, every last detail, all the drill movements for the military. They will have been rehearsed. And I think one of the things that people don't often know is the amount of preparation, not just on the visible ceremonial that you see on the television pictures that you're looking now. I mean, those are rehearsals with people not wearing all the full uniforms, the sort of undress rehearsals, as it were, but also all the administrative arrangements behind that, because many of the servicemen taking part in the ceremonial today, they will have been engaged, in fact, programmed to be doing other things at this time. So some will have been on operations in the recent past. Others will have been planned to be out on training exercises because, as the Duke himself will have known, the military is a 24/7 operation. And so people will have been adapted and flexed away from what they were supposed to be doing to come and do this willingly, by the way. The servicemen are incredibly proud of owing their allegiance to the Queen, to the royal family, above all.
And you talk about the fact that it is long in the planning. The Lord Chamberlain, William Peel, who's overseen the organisation and planning of this, has just retired, handing over the reins to Andrew Parker. Will he still be involved, do you think? I mean, it seems extraordinary to think that something you've planned for all this time, which happens a week after you retire, that you won't have an involvement.
Earl Peel's... the hallmark of Earl Peel will be stamped all over this plan, as with a lot of other people. And in fact, I remember when I retired as Black Rod, and I was responsible for all the planning for example, the Queen's lying in state in Westminster Hall, should and when, and it will be when that moment ever happens that she dies and she lies in state. When I retired, I handed over all those plans to my successor. I had a very good deputy who actually probably knew more of the detail on some parts of the plans than even I did. So I think you'll find that in these things, the succession and the handover of these plans and the contingency arrangements is always there. But just as my successor, as Black Rod, occasionally rings me up to interrogate the corporate memory, I'm sure that there have been some phone calls between the two Lord Chamberlains, the present one and the recently retired.
Mm. You, of course, met the Queen and the Duke. What are your memories of them?
Always very happy memories. I think one of the things which I remember having to brief on a number of occasions groups of people who were about to meet the Queen and the Duke. And one of the things I always remember saying to them is, you'll probably remember the Queen when you see her very often on the television programs, and the Duke too. They walk in and they quite often have a rather serious, almost stern look on their face. And that's because they're probably taxing their corporate, their briefing memory of the briefing notes, who they're meeting next, what they should be saying, particularly at diplomatic occasions. And I always brief people, what will happen next is the Queen will look up and she will look at you, and the Duke too, and they will look at you, and suddenly they will smile. And when they smile, it's like someone's turned all the television lighting on in the studio. It's bright and illuminated, and you will just feel relaxed because they want you to be relaxed. And when they talk to people one-to-one, face-to-face, close up, they're very relaxed and they listen very carefully, which is why the Duke, of course, was always one for quipping back, because people would say things perhaps spontaneously, perhaps not having fully thought them through, caught in the moment, you might say. And the Duke would quip back very, very quickly because he was listening. And he would fire you a question that would take you unawares. And immediately the atmosphere would become informal, but above all spontaneous. And people could be themselves he had that extraordinary knack of relaxing people to be themselves.
And when we look at what's happening today, obviously because of COVID, a very small number of people attending this funeral, just the number of 30. Right decision, do you think, for the Prime Minister not to attend?
Well, it's not for me to decide whether it is or isn't the right decision for the Prime Minister. That's one for him. But I think it is a very family affair, and I'm sure there will be other occasions when there can be perhaps recognition in a different setting for the life of the Duke. But I think, in a way, our thoughts should not be about the politics and the political persona around this. And indeed, I could see sort of complications. If the Prime Minister was there, then why not the leader of the opposition and the leaders of other political parties? And actually, when great figures die, very often there is a funeral just for the family, because this is, after all, that last moment when a family gets to say farewell to a family member. And I can remember my father's own funeral. He was a general, and we had a funeral for family and friends. And yes, there were some other military people there who came, but not representatives from all the charities and regimental associations and so on that he had represented. They came to the memorial service. So the funeral was very much for us a family and friends event. And I think that will be the same and matters very, very much to the Queen. As you can see from the photographs, she was very family oriented, and so was the Duke. And I think our thoughts today should be with the Queen and for her immediate supporting family around her.
David Leakey, a former Black Rod, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Well, our correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, is with me here at Windsor Castle. And Alistair, David Leakey there talking about the fact that a lot of people won't be at the funeral because of the size and because it is a family event. But there will be a lot of military here throughout the day, won't there, representing the different units that the Prince was associated with?
730 military personnel. So we talk of a small and intimate funeral. It is by ceremonial funeral standards, but there will be a large military contingent here. And actually, I think because of the absence of foreign dignitaries and heads of government, ambassadors, extended family, the sort of people who would attend if it were not in COVID times, the focus on the military will be even greater. Their role will be even more impactful than it would have otherwise been. Now, like so many, they have been planning this funeral for years and years and years. They've been revising it, tweaking a little bit. They knew that if something were to happen, if he were to pass during COVID times, they would need to shrink it back and sort of strip out a number of the elements they're thought of. So, as you'd expect with the military, not only do they do an awful lot of planning the entire time, but they're pretty well rehearsed as well. And they've been making sure over the last couple of days, I've watched it, that they are getting it absolutely step perfect. And I'm sure it will go right on the day.
Sure it will. Alistair, thanks very much. Well, just a reminder that full coverage of Prince Philip's funeral will take place here on Sky News. We'll have a special programme today from 12:30. There'll also be live coverage from 2:40 on Sky One. Well, let's take a look at the front pages of the papers this morning. Lots of them are focusing on today's event here. The Times previews Prince Philip's funeral with the simple headline, "The Queen bids farewell." The Mirror's headline, "Farewell, my love." The Sun says, "Farewell, my prince." The Express offers its support to the Queen, declaring, "Always there for you, Mum." The Mail looks ahead to today's funeral, saying, "One last moment with her prince." The Telegraph quotes from remarks expected to be given by the Dean of Windsor as he conducts the service. "With grateful hearts, we remember the many ways in which his long life has been a blessing to us." And Prince Philip's legacy is reflected on front pages across the country, including here in the Yorkshire Post. Meanwhile, the Eye reports that pregnant women are next on the priority list for the COVID vaccine. And that is also the lead story for The Guardian. The Financial Times has more on the David Cameron lobbying row. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. And as we were just saying on the front of those papers, pregnant women could be offered the COVID jab as normal and should be, according to Britain's top scientists. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has said it would like them to be given the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines at the same time as people in their age group. A look at the latest coronavirus figures. 2,596 new cases have been reported, with 34 more deaths, which brings the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 127,255. Another 129,782 have received their first vaccine, and 417,683 people have received their second dose, which means that nearly 4.5 million jabs have now been given out across the UK. A leading scientist has told Sky News that the Prime Minister should cancel his trip to India next week. A new variant of coronavirus, which has also been detected in Britain, is being blamed for a huge rise in the number of new cases there. A protest has been held in Chicago after the police shooting of a 13-year-old boy. Adam Toledo was shot once in the chest by an officer in late March, moments after dropping a handgun and raising his arms. Protesters have called for the officer who fatally shot Adam Toledo to face charges. For the first time in 62 years, the leader of Cuba will not be called Castro. Raul Castro last night resigned as head of the ruling Communist Party. The 89-year-old and his brother Fidel held power since the revolution in 1959. Let's get a look at today's weather now with Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. We're looking at mostly fine and settled conditions across the vast majority of the UK and Ireland once again for today, thanks to high pressure still firmly in charge. It's a chilly start once again, though, with fairly frosty conditions out there as well. One or two isolated patches of mist and fog. Otherwise, it's dry and sunny. Perhaps a little less cold across the far northwest, where it's cloudy and breezy. And through today, we'll see little change on that story, really. We'll continue with lots of sunshine, a lot of dry weather, bit of fair weather cloud bubbling up here and there, maybe turning that sunshine hazy at times, but all in all, it's looking fine, and temperatures tiny bit below average for the time of year, but we could see them slightly higher than yesterday, locally up to around 15 or 16 possible. Later, though, we are seeing cloudier skies develop across Western Ireland, Western Scotland too. It will become breezier across these areas, with rain over Western Ireland by this evening.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Thanks very much, Naz. Now, Prince Philip has been a high-profile public figure from the day he became engaged to the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Martha Kellner has been speaking to the longest-serving royal photographer, Anwar Hussain, who's travelled more than 50,000 miles to more than 70 countries alongside the royal couple.
Anwar Hussain began an extraordinary life behind the lens, photographing rock stars and film stars. But the ultimate celebrity family became his life's work. For more than half a century, royal tours took him to Nauru, Nepal, New Zealand and everywhere in between, capturing the Queen, and at her side or in the background, but always there, was the Duke of Edinburgh. It's an extraordinary life that he lived, and you were living it right alongside him.
Yeah, all travel around the world. And
as one of the royal family's favoured photographers, Anwar was given licence to capture them in more private moments.
He didn't, like other photographers, he would rather tell them off. He never told me off. He always used to say, "Oh, you are still at it." Yeah, he had a wicked sense of humour.
He's credited with helping transform their image from stiff and stuffy to relaxed and relatable. The Queen liked this picture of the family in Montreal in 1976 so much she made it an official Christmas card. They were there to watch Princess Anne compete at the Olympics.
It was unusual. Normally, if a royal family goes away, they leave somebody behind. And this time they all went. But I told them that I wanted this is the first time history being made. You've never been out of the country. And we've got to have this picture, and we must record history. I said, oh, do you have to?
He was also on hand to witness the vulnerable moments of the Queen and her husband.
In Morocco, they were in the desert, and they had to sit down on the floor and have a lamb, roasted lamb, eat with their hands. And you can see the picture. The Duke is there, very concerned, and looking at the Queen.
For the Silver Jubilee tour in 1977, Anwar travelled 80,000 kilometres alongside the royal couple.
Duke and Queen liked that culture, dancing and celebration of the ways of living and everything like that. And also he was quite fascinated about seeing men in grass skirts and things like that. He always used to have a joke with them, you know. I don't know whether he was pulling their leg or whether they understood his sense of humour.
He was known as being quite direct, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, he was terribly direct, absolutely. And especially with local people, he used to, say all sorts of things like that and got away with it.
Prince Philip was most relaxed spending time on the water at the Balmoral estate or carriage driving, which replaced polo as his sport of choice.
I think he quite liked the where they didn't have to wear uniform. They quite like being overseas.
Outside their own friends and family, there's nobody who has spent more time with the royals, up close and personal. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Chippenham.
Well, we are, of course, going to have much more on Prince Philip's funeral throughout the day here on Sky News. Preparations now happening inside Windsor Castle behind us here and also in the wider area, although people here in Windsor are being asked not to come down to the castle to mark the Prince's passing at home. Well, welcome back to Windsor Castle. The funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh is to take place this afternoon, marks the end of an extraordinary and privileged life. The service will reflect aspects of his long service and often low-key lifestyle. Well, we're joined by the British historian Sir Anthony Selden to reflect more on Prince Philip and his life. Sir Anthony, you've written a piece about how he was a clearly devoted husband, distinguished military man, very hard-working. But why do you think he was remarkable?
Because of the length of service, the longest consort in British history, and because he was married to the Queen, who has been such a figure in almost everyone's lives. It's very hard for people to remember any life without her being on the throne, and because he was devoted. He played the part quite extraordinarily well at a time when many people in public life disappoint and let themselves and the country down. He put service first, and he put his efforts into a lot of great causes, including young people and building the environment and building the fabric of society. So, in every way, just a remarkable person, but somebody also of their time, not somebody who was gummed up. His often oft-repeated bloomers, his perhaps ill-chosen words showed him to be a very human being. I mean, I think people felt that they were listening to a real human being.
You talk about his devotion to the Queen and being a consort. There will be some women who will look at what is the tributes that have been paid to him over the last week and say, well, there are lots of female consorts all around the world who do this job day in, day out, and nobody really makes a big fuss about this. But we have to remember, don't we, that it was a very different era in the 1940s when he took on this role, which is what perhaps makes it quite so remarkable.
Yes, I mean, you can draw an analogy with British prime ministers. There have been 55 British prime ministers, but only 2 of them have been female, and their own particular consorts, Dennis Thatcher and Philip May, to Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May, had an unusual role because the role has so much cast out as a woman playing the part to the male leader. And that, for a man of action, I mean, he was no wimp. He was an extraordinary action man, full of a determination to make a mark and interested in so many areas. I mean, that must have been much more difficult for him to play a role where he was always behind his wife, the Queen, literally behind her, but also couldn't speak his own mind, and always to an extent in her shadow. And for somebody who was so full of life, larger than life, such a big presence, so full of ideas and determinations to act them out in so many ways. I mean, that was, I think, remarkable for him, far more so than in the more conventional role of a woman to a male leader.
Was he a good father, would you say?
Well, look, we don't really know. I mean, at the same time, not least with the Netflix series The Crown, but in so many films and television, documentaries and dramas, they are the most known about family in the world. I mean, what other family possibly has had the limelight, the exposure that the royal family have had? And yet also, and paradoxically, we don't know that much. We think we know because we're told by very authoritative sources like Netflix, which actually, and with The Crown, which actually are not so truthful, that this is the truth and it portrays it as the truth. But we know much less about what really has happened. But the strong sense from those people who really do know what's happened is that he was a very good and a very loving father to his daughter Anne and to his 3 sons, but also could be firm and held the family, or helped with the Queen hold that family together. So yes, I think he was a good father, but I think we should do a check on that we really know much less than we think we know.
Sir Anthony Selden, interesting to talk to you today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Many thanks.
Well, while proceedings are taking place here, normal life across many parts of the country is expected to pause for the funeral. After being married to the Queen for more than 70 years, the Duke of Edinburgh is known to people all over the United Kingdom. Sky's Dan Whitehead's been to Torbay in Devon and spoken to people young and old about how they will pay their respects.
Prince Philip, a man much admired, always upright and strong, immaculate, perfectly attired. He seemed to put no foot wrong.
Oh, that's so nice.
Do you like it?
It's a chance to remember a man they grew up with. Residents at Woodland Court Care Home in Torquay are preparing to pay their respects to Prince Philip.
He always seemed to be upright and strong, and he wasn't hiding or kind of, I don't know, he just seemed to be genuine.
93-year-old Cyril met the Prince when he visited Devon.
It's only just come to light what he really did when he was alive. I mean, all the things he was capable of and all the visits he made to different places and things he did. I mean, he was always in the background of the Queen, and I'm sure she's going to miss him terribly.
With large gatherings still banned, many will be marking the moment in their own way.
One for yourself. Thank you very much. No problem.
The Babbacombe Inn will be halting service at 3 o'clock, joining the nation in a minute's silence.
I shall be at home with a beer, sat down with my dear wife, and we'll be watching it. Yeah, we'll be sorry to miss him.
Well, I shall be watching it, and, I think it'll be very emotional, to be honest. Yeah, I think he was a wonderful man.
I think just taking a moment to reflect, and I think hopefully we'll have nice weather and it will just be a moment to sort of stop and take stock, won't it?
Celebrate his life as well.
Nationally, there will be little pomp and ceremony.
While many people will be watching the funeral from home or raising a pint in the local pub, for younger generations, they may be spending their Saturday preparing for his award as the Duke's legacy lives on.
Ashley Hone has helped run the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme for 18 years.
I think the Duke would want them to continue doing what they're doing, to be positive, to broaden their horizons, to seek new experiences, and to remember that his legacy should enable them to have access to that.
Any events on Saturday will be low-key, just as the Prince would have wanted. Regardless, the nation will pause to remember a lifetime of service.
Prince Philip.
Good guy.
There, well done, David.
An officer and a gentleman.
Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in Torbay.
Well as living through many moments of history, the Duke of Edinburgh remained often reluctantly in the public eye until the final weeks of his life. We're joined now by Emily Nash, Royal Editor for Hello magazine. Emily, great to talk to you this morning. How do you think his passing changes the royal family?
It's going to be a huge blow for the Queen in particular. Obviously, she has worked without the Duke at her side since 2017 when he stepped back from public duties. But nevertheless, the loss of her husband of 73 years is going to be absolutely devastating for her. So they will want to rally around her and support her as best they can. And given her own advanced age, that's something that's been happening increasingly over the last few years. But I think we will continue to see senior royals joining her on engagements where appropriate, and spending more and more time with her away from the cameras.
As you say, she's known for her stoicism, and we look at this lovely image of her and Prince Philip together. Do we know at all how she is coping privately?
We're hearing that she's bearing up well. She's taking daily walks in the gardens at Frogmore with her puppies, which must be a huge comfort to her. She has a new doggy and a corgi. One of them is actually called Mick, I believe is the pronunciation, which is a reference to this beauty spot where she and the Duke were photographed by the Countess of Wessex back in 2003. So there's obviously a lot of reminiscing, I'm sure, and spending time where she can at a distance with her loved ones.
Mm. The amount of flowers that have been brought to royal residences and the warm tributes that have been paid to the Duke, and we heard just some of them there a short time ago, do you think he would have been surprised by how warmly he clearly is regarded?
Well, several members of the family have commented on the fact that he would have been amazed by the outpouring. And of course, this is despite the royal households asking people politely not to leave flowers, but to instead perhaps make a donation to a charity associated with the Duke or one of their own choice. But I think it really shows the level of respect that people had for the Duke and also, of course, for the Queen. And there's also a sense that so many people in the UK this year have had to grieve people in these very difficult pandemic circumstances. And there's a huge amount of sympathy for the royal family at this moment.
Mm. There will be a lot of people watching today because they want to mark the occasion, but there will also be those rather curious to look and see what is going on behind the scenes at the royal family, looking at the body language between the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex. Funerals can often be awkward times for families, can't they? Do you think this one may be an opportunity to build bridges?
I think anything that is going on in terms of the relationship between William and Harry will be very much happening behind the scenes. We're not going to see any outward displays of affection or otherwise. This is a funeral. It's all about honouring their grandfather. It's about supporting their grandmother, the Queen, and everyone wants the focus very much to be on giving him the most fitting send-off they can. That said, inevitably, there's going to be a huge amount of scrutiny. This is the first time we'll have seen Prince Harry in the UK for more than a year, and of course, the first time we've seen him with his family. So there's a lot of pressure on him and on the other royals, in fact, to do this in the media spotlight. I think they will be having any discussions around deeper family issues away from this and after the funeral.
Mm. Mm. Emily Nash, Royal Editor of Hello, thanks a lot for joining us this morning. Well, with us also this morning to review the papers are Nigel Nelson, Political Editor of the Sunday Mirror, and Catherine Ostler, Contributing Editor for the Daily Mail. Nice to see you both again. Nigel, kick off now. Which is the first paper that you've picked for us this hour?
Well, looking inside the Times now, where the Times sort of focuses in on some of the things that Prince Philip was slightly less known for, and they're pointing out the significance of the carriage and 2 ponies that will be in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle today. Now, of course, that carriage driving became Prince Philip's sort of favourite sport after he was forced to give up polo at the age of 50, and he was still doing it into his 90s. Now, carriage driving can be a pretty sort of dangerous occupation, especially competitively, and Sophie Wessex talks about how on several times he had to be pulled out of a few ditches. But it seems to show that Prince Philip really did like to live life to the full, and on the edge. So it's obviously a very fitting symbol for what he's doing. The particular carriage, the carriage today, will be one he designed himself, in the same way that he designed or helped to design the Land Rover for his funeral. So one can see how Prince Philip had actually planned this day right down to the last letter to give himself the kind of send-off he wanted, but without too much public fuss around it.
Mm. And the pigeons, Nigel?
And the pigeons?
Yes, I believe that there was going to be the pigeons that were released today as well.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yes, and that is part of it. Again, something that he'd asked for, and something that he planned all the way through. I mean, everything from the hymns that are going to be sung, right through to the prayers and the service. All of this was something that he'd been working on for some time.
And Catherine, let's bring you in. You've picked the Mirror for this hour, and something we
no,
just
I haven't actually.
with Katie Nash.
I haven't seen the Mirror.
I beg your pardon. Well,
sorry, I'm not a
at the Mirror
contributing editor
anyway.
to the Daily Mail either. Can we just get that right?
Oh, goodness me! I'm so sorry, Catherine.
It's okay.
I will have some stern. I'll have some stern words after we've done this. The Mirror is talking about the Queen and how she is hoping that the funeral will lead to healing the rift between William and Harry.
Yes.
I suppose a lot of people will hope that, won't they?
Yes, they will. I mean, I think with all families, we have that feeling that there are things you've just got to sort of overlook and move on from. And this is the perfect opportunity, isn't it, for these two to, which we all hope that they will overcome this sort of terrible hurdle. And the chance to put it in context with somebody who's just led such a long life of service and also saw so much suffering himself when he was young. Philip having had the most desperate childhood, the mother being taken away, hospitalised for 5 years, the father sort of abandoning him, really. The great aunt who was sort of murdered by the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution. I mean, not only does he span European history, but he has overcome sort of great pain, and you see that the happiness he found with the Queen made up for this tragic upbringing, that you sort of hope that his grandchildren will see how he could sort of move on from hardship and disagreement and sort of set them an example, really.
Nigel, the Mail is touching on the fact that the Queen will get her own private time. She will have some time on her own with the coffin before the public funeral.
Yes, and how right this is. That I mean, the primary person at this funeral has got to be the Queen, and the family are there to support her. One hopes that Prince Charles is certainly doing an awful lot of that. But what she wanted was just some private time before the coffin left Windsor Castle to spend with her husband. And I think that's quite understandable. I mean, she wants to actually reflect on the 73 years of marriage that they had, the fact that he was there always 2 steps behind her when she was out in public, and in privately constantly advising her. And I think to give the Queen a bit of quiet time for this is actually incredibly important. I mean, it has been a great loss to the entire family, but to her specifically. So you can understand that she just wants that brief period of reflection before the whole funeral begins. And of course, by that time, in a sense, that's where we all share it. That's where the public come in. And although we can't be there physically, we will be there spiritually.
And Catherine, you know, we do think that of all of these kind of events, that the last big event that was here, you know, with Prince Harry's wedding, that at all those events, the Queen had the Duke by her side, and she will feel that loss, won't she, as the Bentley pulls away on this ceremonial procession down, that actually he would have been by her side.
Yes, isn't it touching? I actually can't bear the thought of her sitting in there alone as we're reading that she has to sit on her own with a mask on. That seems sort of so inhumane and is such a sort of reminder of the whole sort of horror of the past year, really. But on the other hand, she has released this wonderful picture. So I think she wants us all too to remember how happy they were. This sort of glorious, you know, sort of so relaxed, sunny picture of the two of them. You can see this is her sort of message of saying this is when we were happiest. They're outside, he's lying on the grass. They could be any lovely couple with better quality cashmere in the cardigan, perhaps, and that lovely trademark string of pearls. And don't they look lovely there? Her lovely sort of tartan rug and the obvious chemistry between them there.
And Nigel, taking a look at the Express, something that we've not touched on a huge amount, really, the importance of religious beliefs for the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yes, that's right. And so he was brought up in the Greek Orthodox Church. And I think religion did play a huge part in his life. And also bear in mind, he was also consort to the monarch, who is also the head of the Church of England. And so not only was he giving her the kind of royal advice that you would expect, and presumably some constitutional advice too, but there was also a very important role which she took incredibly seriously, being head of the church. And obviously that was a key plank of monarchy. And so the church, as far as the constitutional monarchy goes, I mean, it is being head of the Church of England is part of that, and it is a major part. So when you look at the actual service, you can see how he planned the service always with one eye to what was appropriate. So one of the great hymns coming up will be the naval hymn. It's not the title, but For Those in Peril on the Sea is one of the lines which is the most famous. It was the hymn played at President Kennedy's funeral in 1963, and that was to commemorate his service during the war in the Pacific. And of course, this is to commemorate Prince Philip's wartime service, when he served so bravely.
And Catherine, that's something that the Sun newspaper picks up as well, doesn't it? It also has this lovely photograph of the couple, but it also talks about the significance of the Duke's naval career. Yes,
and that portrait there of him in uniform, it's the naval career is sort of the side of him that we seem so far away now, but he was so sort of brave and a sort of man of action and a man of duty, really, and that ties into this idea of his faith as well, doesn't it? There he is in all his wonderful sort of medals, looking so handsome. But on the faith question, I was intrigued to read today in the Times as well, or rather be reminded how close he is to faith. You know, his own mother became a nun and his great aunt also became a nun. Don't know how many people can boast 2 nuns in their close family. But so I think that, you know, there are all these strands of him we're seeing today, aren't we? Sort of the family man, the naval man, this sort of deep faith, this representative of European history, going through from the sort of birth on the kitchen table in Corfu to the Russian Revolution. What an extraordinary life he led, and how many angles